Hello and welcome. In this video, we will take an in-depth look at the meaning of the phrase, "What you resist persists." The principle, "What you resist persists," describes a dynamic that shapes much of our inner life. When we oppose something, whether it's a thought, feeling, or situation, we often give it more strength and staying power. While this might seem counterintuitive at first, it becomes clearer the more closely we observe how our minds respond to discomfort. What we try to suppress, deny, or push away often remains, returning more forcefully or becoming harder to manage. You can notice resistance in a very direct, tangible sense by observing your body in the present moment. If you feel tightness somewhere or pressure inside your head, these are signs of inner resistance. According to many teachings, the principle goes far beyond thoughts and emotions. It also extends to external circumstances, and even beyond that, into other dimensions of reality. And even though we might not know exactly how this works, when we start to understand that the five-sense reality is only a tiny fraction of the whole of existence, it naturally follows that whatever is happening in our immediate experience also has its correspondence on other levels of reality that are currently invisible to us. As above, so below. When we mentally push against something in our lives, an unwanted job, a strained relationship, financial stress, we often find ourselves surrounded by more of the same. This happens partially because resistance keeps our attention fixed on what we don't want, which shapes how we interpret events, how we react, and even what we unconsciously seek out. But, as mentioned, it also ripples out into other levels of reality. What can be said with relative certainty is that when we focus on resisting something, our energy starts to vibrate at the same frequency as the thing we are resisting, and we feed it energy. Even though we consciously reject it, our sustained attention and emotional charge attune us to it. In other words, resistance doesn't just keep something in our awareness. It can cause us to vibrate at the same level, energetically speaking. This happens because strong resistance is not neutral. It's a form of engagement. It ties up emotional energy, frustration, anger, fear, judgment, and directs it toward the very thing we claim to want to avoid. From an energetic point of view, we're locking into that frequency band. The emotion itself acts as a tuning mechanism. The more emotionally charged the resistance is, the more tightly we resonate with that specific pattern. Our thoughts revolve around it, our emotions tense around it, and our behavior subtly aligns with it. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. The more we resist, the more the same kinds of situations appear. In contrast, when we shift attention away from resistance and toward what we actually want to create, our inner posture softens. We stop bracing. We become receptive. This allows space for different outcomes to emerge. In this way, resisting something doesn't just keep it alive. It often draws more of it in. What we pay the most attention to, even in opposition, tends to define the direction of our experience. That's why turning toward neutrality, acceptance, willingness, and surrender isn't passive. It is a form of choosing. It interrupts the cycle of repetition and opens the door for change. With that being said, we are going to focus mostly on how resistance plays out in our physical experience, as this is where we are dealing with it. It's here we learn to recognize it and to change our relationship to it. In fact, this is, to a large extent, how our physical experiences can be viewed. As a training ground for discovering unconscious patterns, thereby making them conscious so that we can let them go. By simply making what was previously unconscious conscious, we begin to change it, because it can no longer continue completely below our radar. If we continue observing ourselves with as much presence and honesty as possible, without, on the one hand, self-deception, justification, or rationalization, and on the other hand, without force or self-blame, we become more and more familiar with whatever we wish to change. And we will eventually be able to let go without effort. Again, this is a shift in mindset, and it is one that requires a bit of trust, or faith, because this is not something we are doing with the mind, or in the same way that we have learned to handle the situations we face in our lives. We are not in control over this process. We don't have the vision required to grasp it in its entirety. Ultimately, this is something God, infinite consciousness, or whatever other term feels most comfortable to you, is doing through you. Your job is simply to stay as present as possible. Observe both what you find within yourself and what your current life circumstances are telling you about yourself with as much honesty as possible. And then step aside, let go, allow, and trust the process. This is not easy, but it is simple and effortless. The mind will try to trick you into thinking that this is what you're doing, while what you are actually doing is struggling and forcing, while whining and complaining about it. This is, at least, the experience of many people. Their actual thoughts, emotions, words, and actions do not match what their minds are telling them about their thoughts, emotions, words, and actions. This strange dynamic can take a while to notice in oneself. It's one of the things that make being human so odd. We can approach life from one predominant state while telling ourselves we are living in the complete opposite. A person who sees themselves as positive might spend most of their day complaining and thinking about all the things they wish were different. Besides the body, the principle "what you resist persists" can be seen most clearly in our relationship with thought. Imagine someone who keeps having the same troubling idea pop into their mind. They try to ignore it, distract themselves, or replace it with something more pleasant. But the more effort they put into avoiding the thought, the more it returns. This doesn't happen because the mind is working against them, but because the act of resistance keeps the mind focused on the very thing it wants to avoid. The mental energy used to keep something out becomes the fuel that keeps it alive. This phenomenon isn't limited to thought. Emotions behave in much the same way. When we resist fear, it tends to deepen. When we deny anger, it often builds until it erupts in ways we didn't intend. The refusal to feel something gives it a kind of momentum. In contrast, when we allow a feeling to be present, without trying to change it or argue with it, it often starts to shift. The experience might still be uncomfortable, but it begins to move instead of staying stuck. As mentioned earlier, this suppression also causes emotional energy to get stored in the body, which over time leads to chronic tension and a life lived, to a large degree, and in many cases, for the most part, from a state of vigilance. In other words, a life lived in fight or flight mode, even though the original threats this system evolved to deal with are long gone. This doesn't mean we should seek out painful feelings or accept harmful circumstances. The point is not to passively accept everything in life, but to learn how inner resistance shapes our experience. There is a difference between taking action and resisting reality. Action is forward-moving. Resistance is reactive. Resistance is a kind of tightening, an inward recoil. It says, "This shouldn't be here." It builds pressure. Action, on the other hand, comes from clarity. It begins when we see a situation as it is and choose how to respond to it, not how to fight against its presence. This is why many modern psychological approaches emphasize the importance of acceptance. Not acceptance in the sense of giving up or tolerating abuse, but acceptance as a way of relating to inner experience, allowing thoughts to come and go without judgment, letting emotions rise and fall without trying to manipulate them, becoming aware of the body's signals without immediately reacting to them. When we accept what is present, we create space around it. That space allows movement. It allows change. One of the most damaging effects of resistance is how it feeds cycles of stress and reactivity. When someone resists feeling anxious, they may become anxious about being anxious. This second layer of resistance intensifies the experience. The original sensation might be manageable, but the fear of it turns it into something overwhelming. These loops are common in anxiety disorders, but they also occur in everyday life. A person might resist sadness, telling themselves they shouldn't feel that way, which only deepens the sense of loss. Or they might resist uncertainty by overthinking every decision, making the uncertainty grow even stronger. In contrast, when we turn toward discomfort with a mindset of openness, something changes. Instead of bracing against an unwanted feeling, we become curious about it. We notice its texture. We see how it moves in the body. We watch how it changes depending on where our attention goes. And we begin to understand that no thought or feeling is fixed. They all shift when given space, but they harden when met with tension. Can you see the shift in focus here? In one state, we are completely focused on fixing the problem, only wanting it to go away. In the other, we shift our focus toward the inside. What emotions get triggered? What thought loops are activated? Are you responding or reacting? Does this way of handling the situation seem familiar? Have you been here before? With this shift, you open up to what is present in your experience instead of being locked into frustration and the need for things to happen a certain way on the outside. This principle is also evident in how we relate to unwanted habits or patterns. If someone is trying to stop procrastinating and constantly berates themselves for it, they often become more stuck. The more they resist the pattern, the more entangled they become in it. But if they instead observe what procrastination feels like, what thoughts arise when it begins, and what deeper emotions might be beneath it, such as fear of failure or not feeling good enough, they start to see the habit in a new light. It becomes less of a problem to fight and more of a signal to understand. That understanding allows for change. Spiritual teachers often point out that our suffering is not only caused by what happens, but by the way we relate to what happens. When we meet life with tightness and resistance, everything feels like a battle. But when we meet it with presence and attention, even difficulty becomes workable. This is not a call to detach from life or ignore what is wrong. It is a shift in posture, from rejection to recognition. This kind of openness takes practice. It does not come naturally to most people, especially in a culture that values control, efficiency, and problem solving. Many of us have been taught that if something feels bad, it should be pushed away or fixed as quickly as possible. But inner experience doesn't work like an on-off switch. It doesn't respond well to force. It responds to attention, to awareness, to the willingness to feel what is actually there. Some people fear that accepting uncomfortable emotions will cause them to grow worse or take over. But the opposite tends to be true. When we allow something to be felt fully, its intensity often fades. The emotion has a kind of natural rhythm. It rises, peaks, and falls, if we let it. If we interrupt it, deny it, or fight it, we often get stuck at the peak, unable to move forward. In this way, resistance can trap us in the very experiences we are trying to avoid. As mentioned at the beginning, the body also plays a role. Emotional resistance is not just mental, it has a physical form. We clench our jaws, tighten our stomachs, hold our breath. The body mirrors the inner struggle. And when we soften the body, we often soften the mind. Something as simple as exhaling slowly or loosening the shoulders can shift our state of awareness. These small gestures of release signal to the nervous system that it's safe to let go. And with that safety, the mind becomes more flexible. It's important to emphasize that acceptance does not mean we should stop caring. It's not about being indifferent. It's about shifting how we care. Instead of trying to overpower our experience, we meet it as an equal. We stop treating it as an enemy. This shift builds resilience. It builds trust in ourselves. And it makes our inner world a place we don't have to hide from. Some forms of resistance are subtle. They show up as constant planning, always trying to stay ahead of discomfort. They show up as numbing behaviors, like scrolling through a phone for hours or keeping busy every minute of the day. they show up as judgments of ourselves and others. These patterns are often automatic, but they become visible when we slow down and start paying attention. We begin to notice what we're avoiding, what we're afraid to feel, and what it costs us to keep running from it. Letting go of resistance doesn't mean we'll never struggle again. It doesn't mean we become perfect or untouched by difficulty. It means that we learn how to move with life instead of against it. We learn how to listen to what discomfort is pointing toward. And we gain the ability to respond with care rather than react with fear. There is something deeply human about this. Everyone has pain. Everyone carries some form of fear, longing, or regret. Resistance turns these into walls. Acceptance turns them into bridges. It doesn't make them disappear, but it lets us walk through them. The next time you feel yourself tightening up, whether in anger, worry, grief, or shame, notice the resistance. Feel it in the body. Hear it in the thoughts. Then see if you can let it be. Just for a moment. You might be surprised by what happens when you stop trying to push it away. You might find that what felt impossible begins to soften, that what felt stuck begins to move. In summary, what you resist persists is not just a concept, it's a lived reality. When we push against thoughts, feelings, or circumstances, we often intensify and prolong them. Resistance ties up our energy, narrows our awareness, and keeps us locked in patterns we're trying to escape. But by shifting our focus inward, observing without judgment, and allowing our experience to unfold, we begin to loosen that grip. This shift doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing a different way, one based on awareness instead of struggle, presence instead of pressure, and trust instead of control. In that space, change becomes not something we force, but something that naturally arises. This principle is not about being passive or helpless. It is about changing the inner stance from which we meet our experience. Resistance contracts, acceptance expands. One keeps our focus trapped in external reality and keeps us in a fixed way of doing things and a fixed expectation of outcomes. The other opens the way forward, allowing us to meet our experiences with openness and ask questions about what our experiences are trying to tell us. When we stop resisting what we feel or experience, we stop being ruled by it. And when we allow our inner world to be as it is, we create the possibility for real change. Change that grows from awareness, not force. That is the deeper meaning behind the idea that what we resist persists. It's not a slogan, it's a map of the inner landscape, a guide for how to meet what is hard without making it harder. A reminder that freedom doesn't come from fighting what is, but from turning toward it with open eyes, an open heart, and the courage to feel. In this space lies our true power. Remember, this is a real shift in focus and mindset, in a world that has programmed us to see only one way of living life. It usually takes some time to recognize just how distorted our perception of ourselves, of reality, and of our available choices, especially in how we direct our focus and our attitude, really is. If you want to learn more about self-observation as taught in the Fourth Way system, gain a clearer perspective on how thoughts work, or explore what surrender implies as taught by David R. Hawkins, we have videos on these topics available on the end screen right now. You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe and check out the description and comment section to see other things that we do. Thank you for your time.